Jesus Christ knew why God had sent him to earth. He knew he needed to do the Father's will, and he knew it would come at a sacrifice. Jesus spent his 3+ year ministry attempting to help others understand the way of God the Father, to help understand the peace, grace, and love that God gives. He crammed every lesson into his very presence, from the very words he spoke to the actions or inactions that he took. From Palm Sunday till Easter is just a few days. And Jesus knew when entering into Jerusalem that these were his last days. What would you do if you knew these were your last days? What did Jesus do in his last days? What were the important messages that he shared with his last time on earth? What did he spend his time doing? What were the last lessons that he needed to teach his disciples? This series is called The Last Days of Jesus, and it's helping us get in the mood and prepare for the Easter season. I'm so overjoyed that we'll be able to at least try to spend Easter together in fellowship with each other. As we look at the outline from Luke chapter 19 up until the end, Luke chapter 23, Palm Sunday, Jesus came in, was welcomed and worshipped, waving palm branches. He then was at the temple the majority of the time, and then would go sleep back in the Garden of Gethsemane at night with his disciples to rejuvenate, then go back to the temple the next day. And this was all throughout that time, throughout Luke 19 through Luke 21. During the times of preaching and teaching at the temple, there were other individuals, Sadducees, scribes, elders, chief priests, trying to trap Jesus, questioning him about various things. Jesus then predicts the destruction of the temple and talks about the end of times and when he would return again. Jesus directs his disciples to help make preparations for the Passover meal, the last meal that they would share together. And during those discussions, he talked about the one who might betray him. And the disciples asked questions like, who was the greatest? Jesus gave the Last Supper, the cup and the bread. And he washed the disciples' feet, showing that he who is greatest is truly the servant of all. After their supper, they went back to the garden. And there, Jesus was arrested. Jesus went before several different people in order to stand trial for the crimes that people said he had committed. And throughout all that time, he was faithful. Faithful to the death on the cross. As we talked about last week, Jesus was being watched and challenged by those who wanted to discredit him. And since arriving in Jerusalem, Jesus was going to the temple to teach every day. But there were other teachers there. In the outer courts of the temple where Jesus was preaching, he would draw a crowd of people. Those crowds were actually worshiping him and hanging on his every word. What happened is the questions by the Sadducees, the priests, and the scribes were designed to try to help drive a wedge between Jesus and those who were following him, to discredit him. So they would come with another question, they'd come with another question, and sometimes they would be very happy with his answers. And sometimes they were angry that he did not fall for their traps. Jesus drew these crowds because his teaching style was so relatable and compared to the other teachers of the law. Jesus would use analogy and story to help people understand biblical concepts. And if you were to take any preaching class nowadays, they would teach you to do the same, to follow the example of Jesus. Because a good teaching is not an effective teaching unless someone can understand what you're saying. And so parables about vines and vineyards and farmers, sheep and goats, fig trees. Jesus talked about all of these things so that people could help understand the concept of what it means to live a faithful life better. In Luke chapter 20, Jesus says the parable of the vine growers who wanted to kill all the servants and eventually kill the heir of the vineyard so that they could inherit the vineyard themselves. Jesus was teaching these things right in front of those who wanted to destroy him. And at the end of that, he talks about how the stone that the builders rejected would be considered the cornerstone, directly in the faces of those who were rejecting him. You see, Jesus' death and resurrection is the cornerstone. It's what the foundation of our Christian beliefs are built on. Important things to say in the temple in these last days. Going on, the scribes and the Sadducees asked him more and more questions. The scribes asked him questions about money and giving, and the Sadducees asked him about the resurrection. Jesus answered these questions truthfully so that people would know the truth and the word, despite what other lies other teachers had been teaching them. The scripture today we're looking at is the widow's gift. The widow's gift, I believe, is less about money and more about our posture as we give honor and praise to God. If we go back several verses to Luke chapter 20, verse 39, we see that after Jesus answers these questions to the Sadducees and the scribes, that all these people are still there. The people worshiping at his feet, the people who are listening and learning for the first time, the Sadducees, the scribes, other people looking on. Jesus spoke well and gave good, honest answers to these questions. And it gave Jesus an opportunity to continue with his teachings. Luke chapter 20, verse 45 is where it gets really interesting, I think. So let's read it together. Luke 20:45. While all the people were listening, Jesus said to his disciples, "Beware of the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at the banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely." Jesus looked up and he saw a rich man putting their gifts in the temple treasury. And he also saw a poor widow put the 2 very small copper coins. "Truly I tell you," Jesus said, "this poor widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on.